Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. In this episode, we're going to talk about application state. So let's get right into it. So essentially what we're going to do is first build a movie search app using vanilla JavaScript. So we're not going to use any JavaScript libraries. We're going to use everything that's just built into the browser. We're going to make a simple app where you can search an API for a movie, and then in the search results, you can add those movies to your watch later list. It's going to be a pretty simple app. But then we're going to take a step back and kind of look at the app we've built and really talk about like what is application state and how does that apply to the app that we built. Then we're going to take that app and refactor it to use a single state object. We'll talk about more what that means when we do it, but essentially this is going to get us a little bit closer to an app like you would build with a front-end framework. And then after that, we'll refactor it again to use like a render or a view function. And then lastly, we will rewrite that app with either React or Vue.js to kind of show the differences between that and vanilla JavaScript. When it comes to that time, I'll ask for a vote in the chat if anybody's watching, and we can decide which we will use. If you're watching live, please throw a message in the chat. I'd love to say hello. Also ask any question at any time. But I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to get right into it. So let's do it. Over here, I'm going to create a directory. Let's just call it, let's call this vanilla client. We'll go into that directory, and then we will make an index.html file. And we'll also make an app.js file. Cool. Let's take a look at it. HTML. Cool. We're not going to use any JavaScript libraries, but I am going to use Bootstrap just so we can have some basic stylings and I don't have to worry about any of the CSS myself. So I'm going to add a link tag in here, and then we can go out to bootswatch.com and grab some styles. Decisions. Let's use Lux. Looks professional. A touch of class. So let's grab the minified CSS, and we will just throw that in our app. Where did it go? Come back. There it is. And we will add the link tag there. Forgot to mention, I got my cast off, but actually now I have this splint on. So I can remove it, but it's still technically like a cast, which is super interesting. I've never seen this. It's got like these Velcro straps. But my hand is healing, the doctor says. I probably have to wear this thing for another like 4 weeks or so. But being able to take it off gives me, every now and then, gives me a little more mobility, which is nice. In this app, we'll go ahead and bring in that app.js that we created. And let's just add like a header right here with a nav. I'm going to use this snippet. What'll happen? Wait. Nav, that's a lot. Well, no, that's the wrong nav. Nav bar? Well, I guess I don't have a snippet. We'll go to the docs. We'll do a main. This main will have a class of container. We'll just throw like an h1 right here that says movie search. Search. I'm turning into a robot. What do you mean, Chad? Oh, because of the cast? What? And then in app.js, let's just log hello world. Just make sure it's working. Cool. So we got a basic HTML file, basic JavaScript file. Let's see the thing work. So in the terminal, we'll do light server. This is an auto-refreshing server. You can install it globally from npm. And there it is. We have our app running on port 3000. We're just getting started, but let's take a quick break, stretch. And actually, I'm seeing like a therapist for my hand, and I have like 4 different stretches I have to do 4 times a day to kind of get my get my wrist back in action. So Chad is saying yes, the cast is why I'm a robot. I don't know. I mean, I guess I probably wouldn't punch somebody with this hand because that would hurt, but I don't know. All right, let's go to the Bootstrap docs. And this is an interesting thing. So getbootstrap.com used to default to Bootstrap 4, but it looks like now they're redirecting you to the Bootstrap 3 docs, and you have to actually click into Bootstrap 4 docs. tricky. And it's probably because a lot of people are still using Bootstrap 3. Documentation, components, let's grab a navbar. Yeah, so I just want a basic navbar. Actually, if we look at Bootswatch, we can see what colors they have. Yeah, let's get this like darkish, grayish one. If I had to say, that'd probably be like pound 333 in hexadecimal. How do I know that? I don't know. Not that. Did I copy it? That. And then I want everything except for the logo, and that is where I'm going to put movie search. Cool. All right, so let's look at our to-do list. The first thing is we're going to get a movie search term from the user. So essentially, I'm going to have like a basic form. The user will type in a search term, and then when they click go, that's going to get back the results from the API. So let's do this. In the HTML, we want just a basic form. And then we want a form group. That's a lot of stuff. I need to work on my snippets because that one's like, it's too much. We're gonna call this search term. And this is gonna say search, type is text, ID will be search term, placeholder will be enter a movie title. Okay. And then at the end of the form, we'll have a nice little button that says, we'll say, go. What do we got? Cool, nice little form. Let's add a little bit of margin at the top here so it pushes it down just a little bit. So on the container, I'm also going to do margin top 2. Yeah, that's nice. So I should be able to say Fight Club, click go, and then we'll see the results below. But before we do that, let's make it so that when I click this button, it will actually log to the console whatever we typed into that search box. So let's do that. Essentially what I need to do is first get access to this. Whoa, I got a form inside a form. Let's fix that real quick. But I need to get access to the form and basically say whenever this form is submitted, run a function, and inside of that function we can get access to whatever the user typed in. So I'm going to make this button type of submit so that when this button is clicked, the submit event of the form will get called. So in my JavaScript, I'm going to create a variable to store my form, and I'm going to use document.querySelector and then just pass in form. So this says give me the first thing on the page that has the tag name form. So we've got our form. And then we'll add an event listener. The event listener type is going to be submit, and then we'll throw a function in there. Let's say form submitted. Hey Brooks, welcome to the stream. Actually, I subscribe to your channel, and if you're watching, you should subscribe to Brooks's channel. He streams live every morning, but I am asleep at 7 a.m. If you do any like evening streams, I will definitely tune in. And so we're going to create a function called form submitted. And this function will get called whenever the form is submitted. Inside of here, I'm just going to log real quick. We'll say form submitted. Save that. But let's watch what happens. So in the browser, do a refresh, open the DevTools. I want to see that whatever they type in, well, I want to see the console log there. So if I search for Fight Club, click go, you saw it for a split second, but then it disappeared. What's happening is whenever a form is submitted in the browser by default, it is actually sending the data somewhere, and we want to stop that from happening. So inside of this submit handler, we can do event.prevent default, and that will prevent the page from refreshing. Basically, we're saying, whoa now, browser, stop what you're doing. I want to handle this with JavaScript. And so that will prevent it from refreshing, and then we should see that console log. So let's try again. Fight Club Go is working. CJ Fan Club, yeah, welcome everyone. And Brooks is saying, yeah, most of the audience watches the videos on demand because instead of showing up live. I can see. I have been sleeping in until like at least 9 every day, so I mean, I could probably be up at 7 one day. I could do it. I've done it before. Okay, so inside of this submit event, I want to actually log what the user typed in. So there are 1,000,001 different ways to get the value of this input. I am going to select this element by ID and then grab its value. So let's do this. Up at the top, I'm going to create a variable called input and then do document.query selector for the thing with the ID search term. And when it's submitted, we can create a variable. Let's call it search term. And that's going to be equal to the input.value. And then we'll just log out. I really got to work on my snippets. That thing is really irritating. For whatever reason, like when I go to type log, it types like HTML dialog element or something. I should maybe just use VS Code. I don't know. But yeah, that should log whatever the user types into the form. So Fight Club, go. Cool. Star Wars, go. Cool. Office Space, go. Cool. So now that we have what the user has typed, we want to send that to an API to get back some search results. So let's look at our checklist. So we are getting the movie search term from the user. We now want to make a fetch to the API with that search term. So for this, I'm going to be using the Open Movie Database API. You can get an API key for free, and it's pretty seamless. Like they'll send you an email instantly, and you get up to 1,000 daily requests. Or you can become a patron and get like thousands and thousands of requests. Let's check out that real quick. Yes, if you give Brian Fritz, the creator of the OMDB API, $1 a month, he will give you 100,000 requests per day, which is pretty awesome. So you can do that. I actually have a backend server that is hiding the API key, and that's what I'm going to use. So please don't use it. You're going to see it in the video, but go get your own API key, please. Please? Okay. But basically, we can make a request to this API, send it a movie title to search for, and it'll give us back an array of results. You can also specify type. So in my case, I'm just going to say type is movie because I only care about movies. I don't want like TV shows or episodes or anything like that. So a basic request would look like, so this is my server, but essentially everything to the right-hand side gets forwarded to their API with my API key. But type equals movie, and search equals whatever search term you want. So these are the results for Fight Club, but if I search for Star Wars, we'll get back those as well. Brooks is asking, is it just him, or is the audio really quiet? Would anyone else like me to turn up my microphone? Please let me know. I did a test recording beforehand, so I think it's okay. But essentially, this is what we want to make the request against to get back the movies to then add them to the page. So let's do that. In our JavaScript, we'll create a variable. Let's call it API URL, and we're going to set it equal to that, but without the search term. And then when the form is submitted, we'll take that search term, add it to the end of that URL, and that's what we'll make the request against. So let's do that. So let's say get results, and we'll pass in the search term. And then I'm going to create a function called get results that takes in the search term. And then it creates a URL variable that's going to be the API URL with the search term on the end. Hello, Emmy. Welcome. Also, Bob. Welcome. And Emmy is saying it sounds okay there. So, might be your headphones, Brooks. Are you turned up all the way? I'm seeing my I'm seeing my audio bar there, and it looks decent. Cool. In the future, I think I'm just going to do a show in front of a live audience, and you could show up there. You wouldn't even need headphones. Yeah? Cool. And I'm just going to log the URL there. Stop it. So we can see that any search term we enter in, it will get logged with the search term on the API URL. Let's check it out. So search for Fight Club, click go. And so now we get the URL with their search term on the end. Or if I search for Star Wars, 150%. I'm sorry. That'll add it there. You'll notice that there's a space in it, but when my browser makes, like when Fetch makes the request, it'll automatically add in these %20s. It's HTML encoding for space, so I don't have to worry about doing that myself. So essentially, I can now just make a request against this URL, and I should get back some results. So let's do that. For that, I'm going to use Fetch. I'll say Fetch URL, and then do that so it's easier to see. We'll get back the response, and then we will turn that response into JSON. And then we will get back some data, and let's just log that data out. I don't know if anything will search if you will show up if you search Fight Club. Is that because we're not supposed to talk about Fight Club? Are you making a joke, Bob? Cool. Okay. Wait. Okay. I thought it didn't work. So yeah. So I searched for Fight Club, and now we're logging out the response. And it's an object. It has a search property that has all of the results, and then each one of those results has a poster, a title, a year, and an IMDb ID. Cool. So we're getting back the results. And now we can iterate over those results and add them to the page. So let's look at the README. We fetched from the API. Now let's add those search results to the page. Now, what I could do is like call a function right here. Actually, I'll do it this way, and then I will refactor it. So when I get back the data, and actually we can just pass this function in here. We'll say show results. And now I can define a function called show results that gets in the results. And actually, I don't think I want to just directly show the results. Actually, because I'll show you. The results is an object that has several properties, right? Response, search, and total results. But the one I care about the most is search. So I actually want to call show results with data.search. So now when this function runs down here, it only logs the array of results. So office space go. Now we're just getting the array of results, and we can iterate over that, add them to the page. So here's what we need to do. In the HTML, I need kind of like an X marks the spot where I'm going to add these things in. So right below the form, I'm going to add a section. Let's just give this a little bit of breathing room on top, and let's give this an ID of, let's call this results. And essentially, each result is going to get appended to this area here. So in my JavaScript, I'm going to store that in a variable. So I'm going to say results section is document.querySelector for the thing that has the ID results. And then in this function down here, I want to iterate over those results and add each one. So I'm going to do results dot for each. That'll give me each individual movie. And for now, let's just log it out so we can see the properties. So if I search for Fight Club, we get all the properties. So right now, let's just add all the titles to the page. So I'll just add a bunch of H3s with the title of each movie. So yeah, like title Fight Club. So let's do this. So when we're showing results, I want to clear out the inner HTML of the results section so that every time it just wipes it out and adds the latest results. And then I'm going to build up an HTML string. So let's say HTML starts off empty. And then for each movie, we're just going to add on to it. We're going to do, we'll do like an H2. We'll do an H3. And then we'll throw the movie.title in there. And then after that, we'll set the inner HTML to be that HTML that we built up. I see several refactors here. we're going to do it. We're going to make that a reduce. We're going to make this return a promise. It's going to be great, but let's see what happens. So if I search for Fight Club, go, assignment to a constant variable. Oh, yeah, so this should be let HTML. Fight Club, go. Cool. So those are all the search results. Very cool. Let's go to Bootstrap and grab a like a card, and we'll add each of the movies in a card. So if I go into documentation, components, card, yeah, basically we want this. So we'll show the poster there, we'll show the name of the movie. I think that's it. And maybe like the year below it. So instead of appending just this H3, essentially I want to append this stuff. But we can fill in all of our information. So let's give, the source is going to be movie.poster. The alt text is going to be movie.title. We're going to put the movie title right there. And then the card text is just going to be the year of the movie. Movie.year. And then no button. Cool. And we'll give this a class of column. And in here, we'll give this a class of row. So each one should take up a full one column? I don't know. Let's see what happens. Star Wars, go! Yeah. So right now, each one is taking up one column. Let's make it so that they're like 3 across. So we can go in to Bootstrap, look at their grid. And what we want is column dash, where is it? Column dash 4, I know, because that would give us 3 across. Let's try it. Column dash 4. And so now if we search for Fight Club, go, that gives us 3 across. And we're seeing movie titles, movie posters, and the year that it came out. Look at this though. So for whatever reason, this movie does not have a poster. Let's look at what the URL is. Wait, what? Weird? What? Is that really not found? Oh. I'm curious. Let's log out the results, because I think for some of those movies, the poster says in A. I don't think it's like a 404 image. Let's take a break. Interesting. Yeah, let's see. So specifically when I search for Fight Club, there are a few that don't have images. So it would be the third one. Yeah, really weird. For whatever reason, it's just a broken image. I think some of these will be like in A though, right? Right? Yeah, like this. So if the poster is in A, we'll show like doesn't exist. You know what? I'm not gonna worry about that. It's just ugly. Let's search for something that does exist. Star Wars, go. Okay, yeah, that's pretty. Sweet. Let's see how we're doing in our to-do list. Add search results. Click to add to watch later. Before they do that, I'm going to refactor this. So one thing I mentioned is instead of calling show results right here, we should call it somewhere else. Now the main idea is this function get results should do only one thing. It should only get the results. But if we look at this, it's getting the results and showing the results. So I want to make it so that I don't have to call show results inside of this function, and I can call it elsewhere. So here's what I'll do. I am going to return data.search, but this get results function is going to return the fetch, And what that allows me to do is wherever I call the function, I can do .then, and that gives me access to it. And from there, I can call show results. And actually, I don't even have to have the variable. I can just throw show results right there. And so essentially what this does is it calls this function, which returns a promise. And then when this finally returns the array of results, that will invoke the show results function, which then shows the results on the page. So let's see that happen. Should work the same way. Star Wars. Yeah, still works. Cool. The other thing I wanted to do was notice how this for each is building up a string. I'm essentially taking an array of values and turning it into a single string. So this is a perfect use case for a reduce. A reduce will let you take an array and turn it into a single value. So let's do that. So essentially I want to say let HTML equal results.reduce. And reduce gives us several parameters, but the first one is going to be my accumulator. That's the thing that I'm building up. In this case, it's HTML. And then the second parameter is each value inside of the array. Now I want this to start off as an empty string. So your second parameter to reduce is where should the accumulator start. In this case, it starts as an empty string. And here I want to return. So I want to return HTML plus that template string. So essentially this reduce will now take this array of results and turn it into one big string of HTML, and then we'll override it. And actually we can make it even simpler. We can just say that, because that would overwrite the inner HTML to be that. Let's see if it works. Star Wars. Go. Wow, it worked. So let's look at reduce on MDN. Now, you don't have to use reduce, and you'll notice like I did it with a for each first. I also could have done it with a for loop. Like all of these ways are totally valid to do. A lot of people just prefer reduce. I don't know why they prefer reduce. I've used it enough that I start to think in terms of reduce. It's supposed to make your code look a little bit cleaner, but I think for beginners it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around. But we did it. And if you can check it out on MDN, it talks about the accumulator and the current value. Like, so I used reduce to turn an array into a single string, but anytime you want to take an array and turn it into a single value, you could also use reduce. So if I wanted to sum all of the numbers in an array, so that is take all the numbers in an array and turn it into a single value that is their sum, perfect use case for reduce. Cool. Yeah, so check out on MDN. They show some other examples. I actually don't like their examples. They're all very convoluted. That one's okay. Yeah, this is sum. So it's taking this array and turning it into a single value, which is the sum. This one's flattening an array. Interesting. This one is counting the number of occurrences in an array. Fun times. So may happen, but if you check out coding.garden, you can see my live stream schedule. On Wednesday, I do plan to do a code challenge night where essentially I will just solve like Code Wars challenges for an hour or two. And on that, I will use tons of reduce and like show it with reduce, show it with for loops, kind of like show my thought process for solving problems. Question in the chat, Andy is asking if I can show a log of that HTML. Absolutely. To do that, I have to store it in a variable though. So let's do this. And then let's log the HTML, and then we'll set, well, we won't set it for now. We can just see the log. So let's look at the DevTools. We will search for Star Wars. Go. So it's just a big string, a big string of HTML. And essentially when we set inner HTML, and we can actually watch this happen. So if I look in main and then look in the section, let's now, instead of storing it in a variable, let's overwrite it. And let's watch it happen. So right there, when I set the inner HTML, it actually adds all of the DOM elements. So search for Star Wars, go, boom. You notice it minimized. Is that a word? Minimize? Yeah. And then added all of the content there. Which is pretty cool. Okay, so let me see if I want to refactor this anymore. I think I do. I want to use async await. So you'll notice here I'm using a dot then, and here I'm using dot then. I'm using promises. I'm going to refactor this to use async await, so the code is a little bit easier to understand. I don't know. It's all relative. I just want to use async await. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. Right here, I'm going to say const results equals get results. But because this returns a promise, I want to say await. And then after we've awaited it, I'm going to call show result with results. Cool. And in order to use await inside of a function, you have to mark it as async. So that'll work just fine. And the browser doesn't care that this submit event is an async function because it's not going to listen for the dot then. It's just going to call the function. So that'll do that. And then I can refactor this too. So essentially, when you're refactoring a promise into an async await, first thing, add async to your function. And then whatever the parameter is of the first dot then, that is what's going to be your variable on for when you're awaiting it. So we're going to say const response equals await fetch. And then we're going to say const data equals await response.json, and then we're going to return data.search. So this is doing exactly the same thing, but await allows us to essentially make an asynchronous call and wait for the response, but not like block the code. Like essentially this still behaves just like a promise. It's running in the background. Yeah, so that returns that, and then we call show results. Cool. Let's see if it still works. Can someone give me some give me some examples of movies? Your favorite movies. I'll throw this in the search. And the chat's a little delayed, so I'm going to take a quick break. Enjoy my La Croix. Also, if you're not watching this live, be sure to throw some comments in the chat. Any questions you have, I'd be happy to answer them. Ooh, job opportunity. That's cool. I'm reading my phone right now. Trimmers. Let's look for it. Is that how you spell it? Cannot read property reduce of undefined. Maybe it doesn't exist. Let's see. Well, like maybe that's the wrong spelling. Yeah. Actually, this is a good point though. We should handle this error. So like, what if they search for something that doesn't exist? Thanks for your incorrect spelling, Bob. But can you look up the correct spelling? So essentially, we can say if there was an error. Actually, we can do that. Let's look at the status code. If we look at the network when we request something. Oh. This is an example of an API that isn't exactly RESTful because it's returning an error, but the status code is 304 instead of like 500 or 404 or something like that. Oh well, we can essentially just say if there's an error property, then we'll show that error. So let's do this. So we get back the data, and then we'll say if data.error, then we will show, well, nope, okay. This is tricky. Okay, take a quick break. Oh, there's only one M in trimmers, not two. This is tricky because you'll notice that this function is returning data.search. Actually, here's what I'm going to do. If there's an error, I'm going to throw an error. So let's do this. Let's throw a new error with data.error. And then now that this is throwing an error, I can catch it up here. So I'm going to wrap this in a try catch. So a try catch basically says, try to run this code, but if it throws an error, go into the catch block, and then we can handle that error. So get results will, if there is an error on data, throw an error. Otherwise, it's just going to return the results, and then we'll show the results. But let's just do console.error with the error. See if it works. So over here, if I search for trim mores with 2 M's, movie not found. Cool. And I'll just create a function called show error. And this will take in the error. And let's look at the Bootstrap docs. They have these things called alerts. So that'd be cool. Yeah, we can add like a danger alert. So essentially, we want to set the results section inner HTML to be that. But the text here is going to be error.message. Cool. Let's try it. Trim mores. Movie not found. Let's give this a class of column. That should take up the whole column. Yeah, movie not found. Very cool. And then if we search with the correct spelling, hey, we get back some results. Cool. So some other suggestions in the chat were Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Terminator 2. That's a really long search term. Movie not found. So maybe if I just search for Terminator 2. Yeah, I got it. So it's good that we added that error handling, because if you spell something wrong or if I can't find it, the user needs to know. Fifth element. Movie not found. Do I have to spell out fifth? Yeah, there it is. Cool. All right. Last feature we want to add is click a result to add it to a watch later list. So essentially, we can build up a list of all the things that we want to watch later based on our search results. So let's do that. Now, essentially, at the bottom of every search result, I want to add a little button that says like watch later. And if I click that, that should add it, let's say, I don't know, to the right-hand side. I'll have like a column of watch later. Is judgment without a E? Judgment Day. UFC 12. They look like boxers. That's crazy. Terminator 2. Now, the API might be like very specific that it wants me to have like the exact words in it. Why is Judgment Day not on there? What if I just search for Judgment Day? Judgment Day. Yeah, so like in that one, that's the making of Judgment Day. Oh, there it is. So the title of the movie is just Terminator 2, and Judgment Day is in the image. It's not in the actual title. So the API didn't know how to find that because it wasn't in the title. Okay, but what we wanted to do was add essentially a like a right-hand side where is like our watch later list, and then the results will show up on the left-hand side. So let's set that up. So in the HTML, let's say we have our results section there, but let's create like a parent section. This has a class of row. And then our results will go in there, but this is going to take up column, let's say like 9. And then we'll have a section for watch later. It'll be very similar. ID will be watch later. And that will take up 3 columns. So let's see this. So now if we search for Judgment Day, that shows up here. And then the right-hand side, we're going to show watch later. Yeah, and actually, let's do this. We'll have like an H3 that says watch later at the top, And then inside of there, we'll have the section, and this is actually where we're going to put the movies that we're going to watch later. Just throw like a little message. You have no movies queued up. Trimmers. I feel like I saw Trimmers, but it was like on TBS or something like that. I don't know if I've ever actually seen the movie. Cool. But what we want to do is we want to click a button, add it to the watch later on the right hand side. If we look back at the card that we were looking at, yeah, it's just a button at the bottom. So let's do that. So when we are adding a movie to the page, at the bottom of the card body, oh, I can't use snippets in here. I forgot. Let's just do it over here and copy it. We want to add a button. Yeah, so add the button, and then we'll say watch later. Let's do button danger. It'll be a red button. See what that looks like. No, let's do fifth element. Fifth element. Go. Yeah, so we should be able to click this button, and it'll put it in the watch later list on the right-hand side. Okay, how are we going to do that? Essentially, we need to add a click event listener to this button. When that button is clicked, we need to know which movie was clicked on so that we can add that movie to the right-hand side. Okay, so first let's do this. Let's just give this button a class. So we'll call this watch later button class. And after we have set the inner HTML, let's add an event listener to all of the buttons that have this class so we can listen for when that button is clicked. So we'll do, we'll say watch later buttons is document.query selector, and we want to do query selector all because we want everything that has the class watch later button. Okay. And so this is a collection of all of the buttons. It's not just a single button, it's all of the buttons. So if we want to add a click event listener, we need to iterate over it. So we can say watch later buttons.for each button. We want to add a click event listener to that button. So I'll say button.add event listener click. Should get the event. And then here we're just going to log button was clicked. Let's see what happens. So DevTools open, search for Star Wars. And if I click this, the button was clicked, and it works for all of the buttons. The spacing is a little off, but yeah, that's okay with me. Okay, so when this button is clicked, we need to know which movie was actually clicked on. So here's what we will do. Let's store the ID of the movie on the button itself. So I'm going to use a data attribute. So I'm going to say data-movie ID, and I'm going to set that equal to movie.imdb ID. Let's look at the API to make sure I did that right. Yeah, so every movie has this, well, you got to capitalize ID, but every movie has this IMDb ID attribute, and I'm going to use that to uniquely identify which movie I clicked on. So inside of here, I should be able to get access to button.dataset.movie. Let's capitalize ID just to be consistent. Movie ID. So now each button will have a different ID that we, depending on which one is clicked. So if I click this one, undefined, okay. Is it data set, maybe? Or some other suggestions of movies? Let's try fifth element again. Fifth element. Go. Watch later. I guess not. data. Oh, you know what? This camel casing might actually turn it into dash casing. Let's just call this ID. Yeah, let's just call it ID. And if I search for fifth element, go. If we look in the elements, this button should have a data ID. Yeah, so it has a data ID with the IMDb ID. And so if we click it, there we go. So now each button, let me throw this at the bottom. Each button has a unique ID. So now we can, when it's clicked, we can somehow get that movie and add it to the right-hand side. Happy Gilmore, that's a great one. I had that on VHS as a kid, and I would watch it all the time. Happy Gilmore. The making of Happy Gilmore. Cool. But if I click that, yes, I get a unique IMDb ID. So here's the thing. Inside, like this function here, actually it does, inside this function, we actually have access to results. So we could search results for the movie that has that ID, and then take this exact same template and just add it to the right-hand side. Yeah? Let's do that. Okay, easy enough. We are going to refactor this. It's going to get a lot cleaner, but let's do it. So right here, I want to say movie is going to be results.find, and I want to find the movie where movie.imdb ID is equal to the ID, and let's store that in a variable. So ID is going to be button.dataset. And so this is destructuring. This is saying grab the ID property from the dataset, store it in the ID variable, then we're going to find the movie that has that ID, and then we should be able to just log that movie out. Let's see. So search again for Happy Gilmore. Spell it right. There we go. If I click watch later, boom, we get that nice JSON object. So now I could use that JSON object to add it to the watch later section. So here's what I'm going to do. This template string I kind of want to reuse. So I'm going to create a function that says like get movie template. So let's say get movie template, and then pass in the movie. And then down here we'll create that function. Function get movie template, and we just want to return that. But I only want to show the watch later button if it's on the left hand side. So let's include like a variable like button and we will default this to true. So if button is true, let's show the button. So now let's do this. This is super interesting. So if the button is true, then I want this string. Well, and actually that needs to be a template string. This is getting messy. Let's clean it up. So if the button is true, do that. Else show nothing. Wow. Would you believe that this is vanilla JavaScript? So this is a template literal with a ternary inside of it. And it's essentially saying if button is true, then show the button. But if it's false, then just have an empty string. Welcome, Juan. Greetings from Colombia. That's awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah. Sweet, sweet. Okay, so that should still work as desired. So if we search for Happy Gilmore, still works, and we still have the buttons there. But now, when I click this button, instead of just logging it, I want to add it to the right hand. So this is my break timer. If you're new to the bus, okay. Man, I hate this. Okay, I might have to okay. Bonjour from France. And Brett, welcome from New Zealand. If things are getting choppy, please let me know in the chat, because my my streaming software is telling me that it's dropping frames, so I may need to go restart my internet really quick. Let me know. I'm going to keep on coding. Let me know, though. So essentially, I want to say get movie template with the movie, and we'll say false there so it doesn't show up a button. Let's see what we get. So we can search for Happy Gilmore. And then if I click add to watch later, it shows up. But I need to set some classes on that. So this needs to have a class of row so that anything that's added to it will show it. And actually, I want to parameterize the number of columns too, because on the left-hand side it should be column 4, but on the right-hand side it should be just one column. So let's make this a parameter to the function columns, and then we'll just throw that right there. And so when I get the movie template here, it should take up 4 columns, and then when I get it here, it should take up 1 column. Happy Gilmore, go. Eh? Okay, that's broken. I think I also know the issue. This is there. Let's just get rid of that, because essentially it's adding it beside it, and so it's not showing up. Let's try it. Happy Gilmore, go. Watch later. Let's inspect it. So this has a class of row, and then the movie, it should be 12, because it needs to take up all of the columns. So this needs to be 12. Yeah, Juan just asked in the chat, am I going to share the code? Actually, I will upload it to GitHub right now so you can take a look, but yeah, absolutely. Watch later. Yay, there it is. All right, and then if we search for Star Wars, for whatever reason, that's getting pushed way down. But we can add that there and that there. And if we search for Tremors, we can add, I guess, the whole series. So start with 1. Oh, it's starring Kevin Bacon. Didn't know that. 2 and 3. And then let's search for something that doesn't exist. Movie not found. Yeah, and so now we have all these cool movies in our watch later list on the right-hand side. Cool. Let me push up space around. Is that a Bootstrap property? I think it also has something to do with let's look at my HTML layout. So I have this as class row, and then it has 2 rows inside of it. Yeah, that's true. So they probably have spacing utilities. So because it's based, if we make it space around, then it'll I guess push it up to the top. Is that what we're thinking? Let's see. Oh no, I'm looking at cards. I want to look at layout. Z index. Oh, grid. Utilities for layout. Changing display. Use for responsibly toggling common values of the display property. Mix it with our grid system. Okay. Does this have a space around? No. But let's see if we doesn't exist. If we set the property on this parent, let me look up Flexbox space around. Is that an align items thing? Space around. justify content. Not that. Let's try it real quick. So if I do justify content space around. Oh, well, that's nice. Clean that up a little bit. And then what should align items be? Justify content, align items, flex start. Yeah, so let's refresh the page. If I do like Star Wars, what's happening is when I add that to watch later, it's showing up like way down there. So on this, if I say justify content space around, so that fixes that. And if I do align items, flex start, I think. Yeah, look at that. Puts it at the top. Sweet. Okay, so let's add these two things as just like a style property in my CSS. Cool. Thanks for the tip, Andy. So I'll give this section a class, and then we'll add it in the CSS. So on here, let's call this movies area. And then in the top, I'll just add some inline, not inline styles, but like a style tag up at the top, where the thing with the class movies area has those two properties. Awesome. So now, if I search for Star Wars, go. I can watch later. Cool. And if we search for Happy Gilmore, go. I can watch later. Sweet. Awesome. So I'm going to push this up to GitHub real quick. Any questions that you might have? I guess you might want me to push the code up before you ask any questions. But the next thing is and the whole point of all of this was to talk about application state. So like I coded this up from scratch, and we're using just vanilla JavaScript, but there's a better way, and we'll talk about that. So let me push this up real quick. Let's add it all. This is going to be the initial commit with vanilla. Oh, I thought I initted it. Okay. Add everything. Oh, crap. I don't want to init it in this folder. I want to init it in the folder above it. Let's remove that. Up one directory, get init there, add everything there, and then git commit. Cool. Let's create a repo. So I have created this organization, github.com/codinggarden, and a couple of repos up there, but in the future, this is where all of my code is going to go. So let's create a new repo. Call this state, application state. So those Git abbreviations are my personal aliases. I actually found them in a blog post. There's like a blog post with like 20 different Git aliases that are really useful. If you use Zish and Omizish, it has a lot of built-in Git abbreviations as well. And actually, you can check out my .files, github.com/w3cj/.files. And in my bash profile, you can see my aliases. So GA is git add, GAA is git add everything in the current directory, GCM is git commit with a message. Yeah. And yeah, I use bash personally just because I've used it all my life and never really got on the Zish bandwagon. But if you use Zish, it has a lot of that built in. In my .files, you can see some other fun things. So like one thing I did there is like when I typed GCM, all I had to do is press up, and it searches through your history for any command that starts with those 3 letters. Yeah. Sweet. And then let's push it. Copy that. Push it up. There it is, and there you are. Okay. So let's do like a quick review of what this app is doing and how it's working before I start to talk about like what is application state. So when we click the results, we added it to the watch later list. We didn't get to this, the idea being that when I click watch later on a movie that's already in the watch later list, I shouldn't see it twice. And also, like, if I've already had something in watch later, I shouldn't see a watch later button in the results. We could do that. I really want to talk about application state now. Okay, so let's look at the code. We'll start at the beginning. So we have an HTML page. It has just a basic nav bar up top. Then we have a form. That form has an area where the user can input a search term. Whenever they submit this form, we get access to that search term to then add any search results to this section here. And then each one of those results has a watch later button on it. And when we click that, we add it to this section here, the watch later section. And so if we look at our app, up at the top, I have all of my essentially elements on the page. I store these in variables and then use them throughout the code. Here I'm just storing the API URL that I'm making the request to. We first listen for when the form is submitted, and then we call the form submitted function. Inside of that, we prevent the default action so that it doesn't refresh the page. We then grab the search term from the input. So input is the thing with the ID search term, which is this input box here. So essentially whatever they type in, we're grabbing that value, and then we're taking that search term and passing it into our function called getResults, and that actually makes the API request. This constructs a URL using the API URL and the search term. So essentially it just tacks on the search term to the end of that URL. So whatever your search term is, it's going to search for a movie with that title. We are using fetch, so we get back the response. We turn the response into JSON. If there was an error, we throw and then show that error on the page. Showing the error is just a matter of showing just like an alert, so it shows up red. And then if there was no error, we'll return the array from the API request, which is the array of results. Let's take a quick break. Cool. So this gets the search results. This returns it, and so up here, we've awaited it, and we get access to that array. And then once we have the array of results, we call show results. Now, show results will essentially iterate over that array of results and reduce it down to a single HTML string. And that HTML string is essentially just this HTML for every movie result. So it's a bootstrap card that has like the image, the title, the year, a button to click watch later. And so for every movie in that array, we call this function, which gives us back the HTML, and we're passing in the movie to get the properties from, and then also how many columns that should take up. And we're just using the columns there so that we can use this function when we add it to the watch later list. Cool. And so ultimately that replaces the entire results section HTML with the HTML of all of the results. Now, when we're adding a result, we put a button on it that has this data attribute. A data attribute essentially allows you to get access to that data inside of an event, in an HTML element event. So we're storing the ID of the movie on there so that whenever this watch later button is clicked, we find the movie that has this ID, and then we add that to the watch later section. So after we've added everything to the page, we get all of the buttons on the page, and then for every single one, we add a click event listener. And inside of there, we get the ID, which is on dataset. And if you're interested in that, search for HTML data attributes. They're really great. You can add multiple, you can give them custom names, and essentially store data in the DOM. And then given that ID, inside of this function, we still have access to that results array. So we then find the movie in the array that has that ID. That movie is then an object, And now we can essentially append this movie to the end of the watch later section using the very same movie template. And we're passing in whether or not the button should be there, because on the right hand side we don't want to see the watch later button. So if this is false, there is no button there. Okay, it's a lot of code, and now let's talk about state. So what is application state? Now, we've been coding this app, and essentially we're storing state in the DOM. Like the state we're getting, or the data we're getting from the API is essentially some of the state of our application. So let's kind of just like look at the app to talk about this. So like state is any variable, any data, anything on your page that can change, anything that will change based on user input, anything that will change over time. So in the case of the application we've built here, even the input value here can be considered state, because like as the user starts typing, the state of this page is changing. The value of the input is changing, so the state of the page is changing. And then when we get new results, the state of the page is changing. We're taking new data and then adding it to the page in the results section. And then when we click watch later on something, the state of the application is being updated again. We're essentially saying watch later now has some other value in it. And just because, let's look up state in computer science on Wikipedia. Because this doesn't just apply to web apps. Essentially, state is like all of the variables in your application. So like even when you're solving a code wars challenge, like all the variables that you create, that's like the state of that function. Those variables are being modified to produce some output, but state is essentially just all of the variables in your application, all of the data in your application. In information technology and computer science, a program is described as stateful if it is designed to remember preceding events or user interactions. Now, we're remembering events because we're essentially remembering what the user typed in the search box. We're remembering what the results were so we can show those on the page. We're remembering what watch later should be so that we can show it on the right-hand side. The remembered information is called the state of the system. So like the state of this page right now is Star Wars is in the input box. There are 10 results in the search results section, and there are 3 different movies in the watch later section. And then all of the data associated with each one of these movies, like the title and the poster and the year, that's also part of the state of the application. Let's see if there's any other goodies in here. Yeah, and specifically we're talking about program state. So similarly, a computer program stores data in variables, which represent storage locations in the computer's memory. The contents of these memory locations at any given point in the program's execution is called the program's state. So to get even simpler with it, like let's create a file just called like state example.js. Let's say I have a variable name and it's equal to the empty string. When JavaScript is running this file, on line 2, the state of the application is a name variable with the value empty string. And then on line 2, let's say I overwrite that to be CJ. Now on line 2, the state of the application is a name variable with the value CJ. So you can kind of think of it as top down. So like as the variables change over time, that's the current state of the application. Cool. That in general terms is what state is, but what I want to do is I want to refactor this app that we just built to put all of our state in one place. So instead of storing state in the DOM, so instead of just only having results on the DOM and only having watch later on the DOM, we're actually going to have a JavaScript variable that stores all of that so that we can keep track of state. So let's do that. While I'm collecting my thoughts and before I start coding on this, are there any questions in the chat? Watch later, or do later. And this last one, I might actually do whenever we write it with Vue.js or React, because with the front-end framework, it makes it really simple. Or actually, I might do this whenever we implement it with state, because it'll be easier that way. Okay, so let's kind of start at the top. And I guess like the other thing to think about is when you are writing simple JavaScript applications, you're like creating a lot of variables. One thing you could do is create a variable called state, set it equal to an object, and then put all of your variables in there. And now any variable that you access would just be like state.name equals that. State.name equals that. And essentially, we're taking all of the variables of our application and putting them into a single object, so it's a bit easier to keep track of. So now we know like anything that's going to be modified is going to go in this state object. So let's do that. So in our app.js, up at the top, let's just do this. So right here, we're going to create a variable called state and set it equal to an empty object. Now let's think about the things in our application. So when the app first starts up, what's the state? Well, the search term is totally empty, and the results array is totally empty, and the watch later array is totally empty. So like we can think of all of the data in our application as JavaScript variables, right? It doesn't have to just exist on the DOM. We can think of it like this. Okay, now if we want this search term to kind of be in sync with our application, we can listen for whenever the input value changes, we can update state to have the latest search term. So let's do that. So on the input, which we've already stored in a variable, let's add an event listener to key up. And essentially, whenever, whoa, what happened? Whenever the user keys up on here, we can just override the value in state. So I'm going to say state.searchTerm is going to be input.value. And then let's just log out state. Okay. Wait, oh, I killed the server. That's why. Start it back up. Oh, actually, I need to cd into that folder and then run light server. Okay. So if we look at the console, as I start typing, the state of our application is changing, right? Every time I enter a new key, the search term reflects what is actually presented on the page. Easy enough. Okay. So now, instead of just directly accessing input.value, later on, whenever I make the request to the API, let's just use state.searchTerm, right? So right here, I was saying when the form was submitted, let's get the input value. Now, because I'm keeping track of that state, we can just use state.searchTerm. And it should work in exactly the same way because every time the key goes up, we're keeping track of that. And it works. So now instead of storing the or of depending on the state of the input box to be in the DOM, now we're actually storing it in JavaScript. Very cool. Now this next thing, results. So in here, instead of setting a separate variable equal to results, let's just say state.results equals get results. And now instead of passing in results to show results, we're actually just going to use state.results. So in show results, now we'll just say state.results. Right? Easy enough. So, and actually, instead of that, let's actually pass in, well, no, let's leave it like that. It's fine. So now, should work exactly the same way. The results are being displayed. However, now, and actually let's, when we show the results, let's log out state. So if we search for Star Wars, now the state of the application is the search term is Star Wars, and the results are all of the results that came back from the API. Very cool. Now, remember in here, we were using this results variable that we depended on being a parameter to this function. But now that results are stored in state, we can actually even pull out this separately, because since state is accessible in the entire file, now inside of here we can actually search on state to find the result instead of depending on that variable. So let's move all of this out into another function. So let's say add button listeners. And then we'll create this function add button listeners. And inside of there, we can say state.results.find. And even, I honestly just want to extract this into a function. Yeah, let's call this button clicked. And this gets access to the event. And now, instead of button.dataset, it's going to be event.target.dataset. So we show the results on the page. We then add the event listeners to each of the buttons. When each of these buttons is clicked on, this function will get called, which gets access to the button being clicked on. And then we should be able to access state here and then set the HTML to be just that. Let's see if it worked. So I'll search for trimmers, watch later, and it works. So it adds it to the right-hand side. Boom. Awesome. Okay, so anywhere else are we using state? Not really. And that's kind of like the basics of it. Well, actually here, yeah, watch later, right? So instead of, notice what we're doing when the button is clicked. We're setting the HTML to be the current HTML plus this. Instead, what we actually want to do is just like push that movie into the watch later array. So let's do that. So here I'm going to say state.watchlater.push movie. And then we'll call a function that says like update, or we'll say, yeah, update watch later section. And the update watch later section is going to be a function that essentially does this, right? But instead of mapping over the results, we're going to map over watch later. I could probably extract this into a function too. I don't think I will though. So essentially, we want to set the watch later section's inner HTML to be state.watchlater.reduce, and then we're going to get the movie template with 12 and false. Cool. So now, every time we push into that watch later array, we're going to rerun this function, which will then essentially look in the array and put each value on the right-hand side. So let's see what happens. So Happy Gilmore, go. Add it to the watch later. It's there. If we search for Star Wars, add it to the watch later. It's there. It happens instantly, right? To the user's eye, you don't see anything happening on the right-hand side, but it's actually clearing that out and then adding everything again. And this is okay because it's a very cheap operation. I say very cheap. This is why things like the virtual DOM exist, because instead of overwriting the HTML every time, we can just compare the virtual DOM with the old virtual DOM with the new virtual DOM and only update the things that need to be updated. This is actually somewhat expensive because we're clearing out the HTML and then re-adding it every time. Similar to this left-hand side, like if you're using something like React, instead of wiping out the HTML and then adding all of the new results, it would be smart enough to only update the posters and the titles when new results came in because of the virtual DOM. But okay, we're updating that to use state. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. But the main idea here being, instead of only storing things in the DOM, we're now keeping track of it in JavaScript, so that if we need to use that state in other places, it's a lot easier. We just modify the variable and then update the UI based on that variable. All right, so we have refactored it to use a single state object. Now, let's refactor it to use a single render function. So notice how we have multiple functions that are modifying the view. So like show results is adding the results to the left-hand side, and then watch later section is adding the results to the right-hand side, and like show, I guess that this is another state of our application. Like, is there an error? If there is an error, show the error. But what I want to do is I want to create one function that returns all of the HTML based on state. So essentially, this entire section here, we're going to build out in a single function based on state, and then just refresh that every time state changes. Before I do that, I'm going to take a quick stretch because I've been sitting down for close to an hour and a half. So I'm going to take a quick stretch. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, please throw them in the chat. I will be back momentarily. And actually, let me push up this code before I do that. I'm going to check out a separate branch. Git branch. State. I'll say vanilla state object. Yep. Cool. I will be back momentarily. I'm back. I really need to get a standing desk, honestly. I think I will soon. Okay. Where were we? We're going to refactor to a single view or render function. So essentially, we've refactored this app to like use a single state. Now we're going to write one function that sets the HTML of this area here. That. Yeah, so let's do this. I'm going to pull all of this into the JavaScript. So right here, I'm just going to create a section. And let's call this app. Now, I'm not going to pull this into the HTML because it gets a little bit tricky when you're dealing with like an input, because if we're refreshing the view every time a user is typing, it could overwrite what they've already typed. Yeah, well, not overwrite it. It would essentially like no longer be focused. So I'm only going to handle essentially this area right here is going to be our render function. So let's do this. All the way at the bottom, let's create a function called render. And this will, let's say it takes in the state. And we are just going to say, well, let's store the app in a variable. So this is document.query selector, the thing that has the ID app. And then we'll say app.inner HTML equals all of this. But now we can use our existing functions. So right now we have this function to show the results. So essentially this code right here, this code that sets the results section, we are going to pull that out and put that on here. So essentially I can just do a template thingy, throw that in there, and that'll work the same way. Let's do that. Yeah. So essentially, whenever we render out the app, anything that is in the results array is going to be put right there in the results section. Let's tab that out. And then we're going to do a very similar thing for the watch later section. So that will be, instead of being results, that'll be watch later. This wants to be 12 columns with no button. And now we can get rid of the watch later section. One thing we still need to do is add the button listeners. And actually, we don't even have to do that. Let's do this. So we have this button clicked event. So I'm going to get rid of all of these functions. But yeah, we have this button clicked event. So now when this thing is being rendered, we can just use the HTML attribute on click and set that equal to button clicked with the event. Yeah, it's very React-like, but this is actually built into HTML. I think that's it. So I guess the other thing is we can pull this error into the render function as well. So here we want to say if state.error, well, if there is no error, then show the results, else show this. And this is just going to be state.error. Trying to format this nicely. I don't know how. That looks good enough to me. So this says if there is no error, show the results. If there was an error, show the error on the page. And now we're going to set, we'll create an error property on our state that initially is just an empty string. And here, now we don't have to call show results, but we'll say state.results equals that. And if it threw, we'll say state.error equals error.message. And here we want to say state.error is empty. So like if we got back results, then there shouldn't be an error. Okay. Let's see what we got. So we have all of our state here. We're listening whenever there's a key up, we're updating the search term. Whenever the form is submitted, we're getting the results, storing that in the array. If there was an error, we're storing the error on state. We have this button clicked function, which will get called whenever a button is clicked on. And now we don't need to update the watch later section anymore. We have this function that's just giving us the movie template for an individual movie. And then we have our render function. Cool. So now here's the thing. Anytime I update state, I now need to call the render function. Because if we look at our app, let's start back up light server. Right now our app has nothing in this area. So essentially, every time we update state, we call the render function and it'll show us what should show up at the bottom of the page. So I think initially we're just going to call render with state like when the app loads up. And that should give us like watch later and then a results section. And then after we either set the error or the results, and actually if there is an error, we need to set results to an empty array, just like we did with the other. But here we should call render with state. Because when the form is submitted, it's going to get the results and then render everything out. So now if we search for Happy Gilmore, it renders. Now, if we click watch later, nothing happens because now in this click event, we also, and actually let's make sure that's working. Yeah. So now in the click event, we also need to render based on state. So after we push into that watch later array, we'll say render state. So let's search for Star Wars. Boom, shows up on the right-hand side. So essentially, anytime we modify state, we re-render the entire section, entire result section, to show the view based on state. Cool. I'm curious, is there anything else where we would need to render? I don't think so. But I guess one thing I'll do is, instead of having to manually call render, let's do what they do in React and create a function called setState. And then anytime setState is called, it will re-render the view. So let's do this. I'm going to have a function, call it setState. And this will get passed in like the new state values. And essentially what I want to do is say state is equal to, we can use the spread operator. So take the existing state and then also spread the new state values. Yeah, something like that. And then, well, I'll have to say this as let instead. And then we can say render with state. Okay, so now instead of directly modifying state, we can call set state. I'm gonna leave this one there because it's special. It's an input, but let's do it here. So we're gonna get the results. So let's say const results equals that, and then I'm gonna call set state. I'm gonna pass in an object with the results and with the error being an empty string. And let's comment out this render function. So let's see what happens. So if I now search for something, say go quick break. If I search for something, that works. And that's because we're calling set state. And also if I do, well, now let's do for the error. If there actually was an error, now I want to set state where the results are an empty array and the error is error.message. I can get rid of that. Get rid of that. Yeah, I think that's it. I guess the last thing I want to do is here on watch later. So instead of pushing into that array, we want to call set state. So I'll say set state, and watch later is going to be equal to all of the existing values in watch later with this movie also. And then we don't have to render it because that will automatically render out. So now we'll say Star Wars, go. And can we add it to watch later? We can't. What's going wrong? Watch later. Oh, it should be state dot. This should be state dot watch later. Watch later. Hey, there it is. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. Easy enough. Now, essentially what we've done is we've taken all of the state of our application. We've taken the search term from the input box, the results that come back from the API, the array that represents watch later on the right-hand side. If there's ever an error, we're storing all of this in a single object. And now anytime one of these values changes, we re-render the entire application to show the latest version of the application based on the current state. So and to do that, we have this set state function, which essentially takes whatever your new state values are, updates them on state, and then calls render. So now anywhere where we want to update the state, so for example, when we get back the results from the API, we call set state which will then re-render the view based on the new array of results. Or if there was an error, it blanks out the results and shows an error message. And then our render function is essentially just setting the inner HTML of the app to be all of the HTML based on if there was an error in the state, based on all of the movies that are in state results, based on all of the movies that are in watch later. So essentially, every time this function runs, it creates a new HTML string that represents like the current latest version of the application. And then we overwrite that, and that's what the viewer sees. Okay, so we've done it. We've refactored this thing. There's probably some other things I could do. I think that's all I want to do for now, because I do want to rewrite this in either Vue.js or in React so we can see what it's like using a framework like that, managing state with a framework like that, and not really using any DOM manipulation. For those of you that are watching live, I think there are a few, like at least 5. Vote. Do you want to see me write a React app or a Vue.js app? I will also say that I have not written a React app on stream yet, I don't think. So take that into account. I'm going to give you 1 minute to cast your vote. Please, if you're watching live, throw a message in the chat. If you have no preference, say no preference. Or vote for like Ember or something. I'm not going to do Ember, but you can vote for it. And I will push this code up. Oh, I thought I checked out a branch. Streaming late? Yeah, I've been on for an hour and 40. I might go 2.5 hours tonight. I might. My favorite, React with Redux. What? Brooks knows that that's not my favorite. But I will say, whatever I choose, I'm gonna use the built-in state, either built-in state with Vue or built-in state with React. I'm not gonna use. I just wrote React, yeah. And I think it's important to note. So if you are using React, this right here is why a lot of people use React, because this is expensive. This is overwriting the HTML every single time we set state, right? Every time we set state, it's just wiping it out and re-adding everything. React uses the virtual DOM, so instead of wiping everything out, it is smart enough to only update the areas that need updating, right? Message retracted. I think Cass just voted for React and then retracted it. I think I'll use Vue. A lot of my subscribers really like Vue. Cool. Yeah, let me push this up. And I thought I checked out a separate branch, but I guess I didn't. Cool. And actually, yeah, there is a link in the chat to the code, but let me also add it on the description of the page. Separate branch. Whoa, that's not it. Yeah, so if you do want to check out the code, it's github.com/codinggarden/application.state, or click the link below. Very soon. It's going to be there very soon. Save. Okay, I think I'm going with Vue.js because and I guess like Andy said, I kind of wrote React. I mean, and you kind of see like how React is working. Essentially, you put all of your state in one place, and then your app is essentially just one big render function that gives you the HTML based on the current values in state. All right, so let's make this exact same app but using Vue.js. Are you ready? If anyone here watch Coding Train? Actually, let me bring him up because he's really great. YouTube, Coding Train. Oh, that's me streaming live. he does live streams all the time where he's like doing coding challenges with like P5JS and stuff like that. But he has a soundboard and he has like a drum roll and like an applause. I need to get one of those is what I'm saying. Let's close that, close that. Okay, let's close that and that. Were you trying to say something, Brooks? You just sent a weird message. So Bob's Paradox is asking, am I starting from scratch? Essentially, yes. I'm going to build the same app with Vue.js from scratch. It's not going to take me that long, mainly because a lot of this is all built into Vue. I'm going to make the same API request. Yeah, I'm thinking I can get this done in... Somebody time me. I think I can do it in less than 20 minutes, or 20 minutes, about. All right, let's do it. So I'm going to do Vue create, we'll say movie search. Vue. Go. All right. I am using the Vue CLI 3. I don't know if they're at a later beta. I don't know if it actually has been released. That's a raised hand? What? What? I am going to use no router, no Vuex. Really, all I'm just going to use is linter. I'll use the Airbnb linter in the package JSON. No, thank you. Here we go. So the command I just ran, Vue create, if you check out Vue CLI 3 install, how do we get that? Just set your timer. Awesome. Yeah, so if you do npm install-g at vue/CLI, you will get the Vue 3 CLI tool, which is what I'm using. That's just Vue create, the name of the app. It'll ask you all those questions, generate the app, install dependencies, and you'll get this. So I think while it's installing, I can go ahead and start coding. One thing I need to do is bring in Bootswatch, just like I did before. So in a Vue.js app, in that public folder is where we can put the link tag. So I'm just going to copy that from this. Let's copy that. I think that's the other thing. For like a lot of the templates in HTML, I'm just going to copy it from my existing app, but all of the JavaScript is going to be written from scratch. So actually, I'll use this elsewhere. Okay, so we brought in Bootswatch. Now in my app.vue, I'm going to just get rid of everything, and this is where all of my Vue is going to go. We'll get rid of that existing component, and then get rid of all of the existing styles, except for that, which we're going to use later. And for now, let's just say hello world. It's done installing, so I can do npm run serve or yarn run serve. Oh, I got to cd into the directory. Let's go into movie search Vue, yarn run serve. There it is. Hello world. Awesome. So here's what I'll do. I want to bring in the nav bar just like I have here. Actually, I'm going to set it up in a very similar way. So I'm going to take all of this HTML and we're going to put that here, but then we're going to start to hook it up with Vue. So that's there. That's there. We don't want this to be ID app. Let's see what we get. Okay, looks the same. Very cool. I guess the other thing is we want to throw all that HTML in the section down here, so let's do that. So in our app.js, we can grab, well, we'll have to update it a bit, but it's going to be very similar. And so in here, let's just throw that. We'll update that in a sec, and we'll update that in a sec. Let's see what we get. Cool, looks good so far. Okay, so let's write the code. First thing we need to do is work on that input box. So essentially, when they submit this form, We want the value of the input. So we're going to put all this on state. Now in Vue, state is known as data. But it essentially is the state of our application. It's all of the things that are changing and that we want to keep track of. So on our state, I'm going to put search term. And it starts off as an empty string. Now, Vue has this built-in thing called vModel, which basically lets us say we want to bind this input to our state so that whatever the user types into that input is going to get set on that value in state. So I'm going to say v-model equals search term. And now, as the user types, that's getting updated under the hood. So now I want a function for when the form is submitted. And so for that to happen, I want to say when this thing is submitted, prevent the default action, and let's say get results. Okay, so I now need a get results function. That's going to go on my methods. And inside of here for now, I'm just going to log this.search term. And that should give me whatever the user typed into the search input box. Let's see what happens. Cool, no errors. Fight Club. Go. There we go. So now we want to make that API request. So let's do it. We want to, let's grab our API URL from here. So we can just store that at the top. And then in here, we're going to say URL is the API URL with the this.search term. And then we want to fetch this. So fetch that URL. And then we get back the response. Actually, let's use async await. So async, and we will say response equals await, fetch the URL. And then we're going to say this dot results equals, well, no. Yeah, we do. Let's take a quick break. How am I doing on time, Andy? Let's say, well, first we want to start. So let's say data is await response.json. And then we'll say this.results is data.search. And then we'll need results on our data. Now, this is kind of the beauty of using a front-end framework. Like in React, you would use setState, but here, because I'm saying this.results equals data.search, I'm essentially updating the underlying state to be all of the results that came back from the API. So there's no need to call setState, there's no need to call render. Vue is smart enough to know that I'm updating this value, so then it will automatically re-render this view up here. Okay, so now that I have results, essentially right here is where I want to show those results. But also I do want to show this error too, so let's pull this in. And I guess I'll have to write the logic to handle an error. So let's just throw in, oh, we've got competing timers. I guess it really depends on when I started. Was it when I generated the app or when I actually started coding? I don't know. Okay, so first thing, if there was an error, let's show this error here. So Vue has a beautiful way to do that. We can say vif error. So if there was an error, show the error here. And then I need an error on my state. And essentially, we need to, here we'll say if data.error, this.results is empty, and this.error equals data.error. Else, this.results is data.search, and this.error is an empty string. So now, fresh, no errors. If we search for trimmers spelled the wrong way, movie not found. Cool. Now I'm going to go grab that movie template that I created in here. Yes, this. So essentially, in my view, right here is where I want to show all of the results. So I'll have this div. Here the columns are 4. And instead of using this syntax, because it's not a template literal, well, first, we want to actually repeat over the movies, of course. And we'll do that right here. So in Vue, you can say v4, and I'll say movie in results. And now this div is going to get repeated for every movie in that array. So now I essentially just need to update everywhere I have that. Get rid of these. Oh, I'll have to do a little bit of updating. But if I want to bind this attribute to be the value from the movie, I need to add a colon there, and that essentially tells Vue to actually look at that value to evaluate the expression. And then inside of the HTML, I can use handlebars to show that value. Now, the logic we had before was, well, I guess we don't need the logic here, because essentially, right now I'm going to repeat myself. I think I'll probably have enough time, so I'm going to refactor this into like a button component, so that way we don't have to repeat the code. But yeah, now we should show every movie in the results array. Let's see it. Star Wars, go. There they are. Beautiful. Too easy. Now I actually don't need like this. I don't need this data ID. I don't need this watch later button class. Essentially, I can just say when this button is clicked, let's watch later and then pass in the movie. And so now I can create a method called watch later with the movie. And for that, I just need to push into my array. So I'll have the watch later array. And here I'm just going to say this dot watch later dot push movie. And now when we click that button, it gets put into watch later. And now we can just do a very similar thing right down here. So we'll have that section, and we'll essentially repeat this, but instead of in results, we want to do in watch later. And we want to show 12 columns, and we don't want a button there. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've done it. Hard refresh, watch later is already defined as a data property. What? Oh, we'll say add to watch later. Got a little ahead of myself. All right, let's see it happen. No errors in the console. I can search for Happy Gilmore. Get back some results. Click watch later. Gets added to the right-hand side. I can search for Star Wars. Click watch later. Gets added to the right-hand side. I think that's it. Did I miss any features? Let's look at the checklist. Get the search term, fetch the API, add the search results to the page, click result to add to the watch later list. Yeah, I think that's it. Tell me how I'm doing on time. I think I'm going to add some features like hide the watch later button if it's in watch later, add a remove watch later on the right-hand side. Yeah. But that was fun. Let me review what I just did. Also, I'll pull this out into a component because that'll be fun. Yeah. Okay. But the whole point of this stream was to talk about application state. Like now, essentially, instead of doing all of this DOM manipulation where essentially the data of the application is stored in the DOM, now we extract all of that out to a single place. This is our application state. So does that mean it took me 13 minutes? Or how long did it take? Bob, what is your timer at? Okay. But essentially, all of the state of our application is now in this one object. And the way Vue works is inside of our methods, all we have to do is update this state, And our view, and this is essentially our render function, automatically updates based on the data that has changed, which is awesome. Isn't it awesome? I'm excited. It's an amazing thing. All right, so first thing I'll do is extract this out into a component, because you notice like this is duplicate code, right? I have this card I'm using for a movie, and I'm showing it both there and both there. It's duplicate. So let's create a simple component, call it movie.view. And this will be very simple. It doesn't have any styles. It's going to have a prop that is just the movie, so we can access all of the movie data. And then we can take this HTML here, pull it out, throw that in there. Now I no longer want the v4, so that's that. And yeah, let's just use it, make sure it works. So I need to pull that component into this file. So I'm going to say import movie from @components/movie. And then on the app, we need to tell it about that component. So components is an object where we just pass in the movie. And then now that I've told the app about the component, I can now use it in my view. So right here, I'm going to say movie, and we'll say v for movie in results. And we need to pass that movie down to the component, so use this binding syntax, and I'll say movie equals movie. And slightly confusing because the name of our component is the same name as our attribute, but essentially this :movie right here lines up exactly with our props. So basically it's saying this component needs data to be passed down to it, and well, we need to show it there. So that's great. Let's see what we got. Star Wars. Yeah, still works. So now that I have that component, I can use it on the right-hand side. And then we'll add in some custom logic so it only shows the button if it needs to. Yeah. And we'll also have to pass down the function because, actually, let's do that. So we need to pass down this add to watch later function so that when we click the button, that still works. So in our top level component, let's clean this up again. And we'll say movie is that, and we'll say add to watch later is add to watch later. So essentially, we're passing that function down so that it can then call that function from inside the component. Cool. Now we need to do a very similar thing, but on watch later. So this is going to be a v4 movie in watch later. Cool. The only thing is we don't need that function. And I guess what we can say is if add to watch later was passed down, show the button, but if it wasn't, don't show the button. Yeah. For now, I've got an idea. We're going to use this thing called slots to show a different button. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. So v if add to watch later. So if we pass down that prop, then show the button so that we can click on it. But if we didn't pass down that prop, then just don't show the button at all. So when you're on the right-hand side, you won't see the button. All right, what do we got? Okay, so search for Happy Gilmore. Go. Watch later. There it is. Oh, I forgot. The other thing is this has a class of column4. So I think, let's see, we should be able to define that on the top level. I think it might get merged in, right? Because on the left-hand side, it needs to be column4. And on the right-hand side, it needs to be column 12. Let's see if this works. If this doesn't work, we can change it up. That works. It works. Sweet. Cool. So one thing I want to do is I only want to show this button if it already has not been added to watch later. So let's do this. Essentially, I need a method where I can check to see if I've already added it to watch later. So I'm going to have a function called like is in watch later, pass in the movie, and I'll essentially say found equals this dot watch later dot find, and I want to find the movie. Well, find the. Actually, no. I can use this. I can use any. So if any of the watch later movies, I'm gonna use a shorthand just because. Okay. So if watch later dot imdb id is equal to movie dot id dot imdb id. So basically, what this says, if any of the movies in watch later, if any one of them matches the movie that I just passed in, then yes, it is in watch later. Okay, that should work. So now I want to pass this down to the movie component. Is in watch later. So that way, if it is in watch later, then hide the button. So now on movie, so I'll say if that, just cleaning this up a bit. So if add to watch later and is not in watch later. Cool. So now if I search for Happy Gilmore, vm.isWatchLater, not a function, because I need to specify it as a prop so that it knows that it's being passed down. Happy Gilmore, go. What? Watch later.any. I thought any was an array function. I know there's like some any. Let's see. Array any? Array, I know array some. Whether at least one element in the array passes the test. Oh, so that's the one I want. Some. So if some of the movies have the same ID, that means at least one does, then it's in watch later. Okay. Let's try again. It's gonna work this time. I know it. All right, are you ready? The behavior we're hoping for is when I click watch later, it disappears on the left-hand side, right? So that way, let's take a quick break. Ooh. This has been a fun time. Thanks everyone for sticking around, messaging in the chat. I appreciate you. But yeah, check it out. So now, if it's already in watch later, there is no button there, so we can't click it. So if I search for Star Wars, boom, boom, boom. Now they're over there. But what's also cool is if I search for new search results, if that movie is already over there, it's not going to show the button because it has the same ID. Awesome, right? I think last thing I'll do is add a remove button to the right-hand side so that we can remove it from watch later. So let's do this. We'll have a function called remove watch later, pass in the movie. First we will find the index. So this dot watch later dot index of the movie, and then we'll splice it out. So this dot watch later dot splice at the index and 1. So splice will remove at this index 1 element. So that'll remove it. And now we want to pass that down to movie. Equals that. Yeah, I'm doing this in I think like a wonky way because basically all I'm going to say now is, okay, we want a button, and it's called remove, and we're only going to show it if remove watch later exists as a prop, right? Because we're only passing that down for the things on the right-hand side, and the things on the left-hand side won't have it, so they won't show that button. This is actually a really good case for slots. Essentially, we can define that function or define this area of the component in the parent based on where it's being added. I I might do that, but let's just watch this work. I'm going to change the watch later to be a green button. So now we search for Star Wars, watch later, we add it. Cool. Check this out though. When we remove it, it automatically gets back the watch later button because it's no longer in the watch later section. Vue.js is awesome! What else? Fight Club. Watch later. Right? Right? Who's excited? I'm excited. This is so cool. Okay. I think at the end there, I just got excited about like Vue features, but ultimately this episode has been about, or it should be at front of mind, thinking about application state, like how you structure your application and how you use the data in that application in two very different ways. Like if you're using vanilla and DOM manipulation, a lot of the times your state is stored in the page itself, like it's not separate. But if you're using a front-end framework, it pulls it out and it allows you to do very cool things. Like notice like how much faster I was able to build this app versus the vanilla app, mainly because the framework handles like when state is updated, automatically update the view. You don't have to manually select an element by ID and change its contents or anything like that. Cool. Any last questions, comments, thoughts, criticisms, shout outs, anything in the chat? And again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Let me push up this code real quick. Ooh. Yeah, one thing about the Vue CLI is it sets up, when you generate the folder, it automatically creates a Git repository, but I don't want this one to be one. I want it to be a part of the parent, so I'm just going to remove that. Awesome. Yeah, a few quick things for anybody. If you have not subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe. Yeah, I'm trying really hard to get to 1,000 subscribers. I believe when I get to 1,000 subscribers and at least 4,000 hours of watch time in the past year, which I'm like half of that and I'm half of 1,000. So once I get there, I should be close. I can start to monetize the channel and like do this more often because I could actually make some money off of it. Also, check out some of my recent uploads. Yeah, lots of cool stuff in there. Check out my playlists. If you visit coding.garden, you can see my streaming schedule. So I am going to stream again tomorrow. This is 2:20 p.m. Mountain Time. When you visit this page, coding.garden, it will be in your time zone. But tomorrow at 2:20 p.m. is Newbie Tuesday. I'll be pairing, I think he's still available, but my friend Tony is totally new to programming, and essentially we just pair remotely, and he asks dumb questions, and that's a good thing because learning is awesome. But yeah, if you visit this page in your time zone, you'll see the streams in your time zone. One thing I'm going to do in the future, so look out for this, is send a poll to all of my subscribers to see what's your time zone, when is the best time when you can actually watch me live. I might change this up a bit so some of my subscribers can actually tune in live. Vander in the chat says he's not live anymore, but thanks. He's just starting React. Await and try catch, and it's massively helpful. Yeah, awesome. I didn't use try catch in the Vue version of the app, but if you do look in the vanilla JavaScript, when I'm using, wait, where is it? Here, yeah. When I'm using async await, I'm using try catch. Sweet, appreciate you tuning in. Also, one more thing. If you visit poll.coding.garden, you can log in with your Google account, and you can vote for and suggest any videos that I should do in the future. That could also be tutorials or walkthroughs. Tonight I just did application state. I do have a playlist on vanilla auth, so I may not do that, but if you have any thoughts or suggestions for videos or live streams that I should do, please throw them in here, and anyone else can click on the heart to vote on that suggestion, just like that. Awesome. Oh Oh yeah, last thing. I'm on Twitter. So many things. This is the last thing, I swear. If you want to get a notification when I do go live, if you follow me on Twitter, this automatically tweets when I click the start streaming button, so you will be notified. Whew. I think that's all I got. Check the description for the code that I just wrote. Thanks everyone for watching and tuning in. This has been awesome. I appreciate you all very, very much. Yeah, I think that's it. Have a good evening. See you tomorrow.